Welcome to the Talent Empowerment Podcast, my friends, where we lift up people leaders so you can lift up your organization. I am your host, Tom Finn, and today we have a guest whose entire focus is to teach you how to leverage your career to make more money. His name is Trapper Yates. Trapper, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you. Good to be here, Tom.
Well, look, if you don't know Trapper, he started his career in finance and accounting, but soon found his interest in people strategy, pulling him towards the world of HR. As a result, Trapper pursued his MBA with strategic HR focus and ultimately landed a job at HP, where he had the great fortune of starting in their rotational HR management program. What's great, though, is over the last 7 years, his focus has been in compensation. He currently serves as the head of global broad-based compensation at HP. And my understanding is about 60,000 employees at HP today, Trapper?
53-ish. Yeah.
53-ish thousand employees globally. Now, outside work, he enjoys spending time with his wife. He's got 4 great kids. He stays active in the outdoors in Boise, Idaho. You can frequently find him coaching soccer, skiing, running, riding his bike. He's completed over a dozen endurance races, including the Boston Marathon, the Speed Goat Trail 50K, and most recently a 70.3 half Ironman. Before we get into business, what on earth is a Speed Goat Trail 50K?
Yeah, so the Speed Goat is a race created by a guy named Carl Meltzer, who has the nickname the Speed Goat. He's a big mountain runner, and this race is down at Snowbird Ski Resort in Utah, which Snowbird's known for kind of big mountains. You start at the base of the hill, you run if you're a professional, you grit it out and kind of hike your way up to the top if you're like me, and then you run down the back and come back up. So it's about 31 miles and 11,000 foot of vertical gain during that 31 miles. So yeah, pretty intense. I've done it 3 times. It's been a few years since I last did it.
Well, fair enough. With 4 kids in tow, I can't imagine there's a ton of time to train. But I think that's spectacular. And tell me about your half Ironman as well.
Yeah, half Ironman. So I've had kind of the bucket list goal of doing a full Ironman, and had a friend say, hey, you should sign up for this. Me and another guy are doing it. This was last year. And so around Christmas time, around December, I said, okay, let's sign up. And the race was May 1st. I went and bought a road bike. I mean, that's how prepared I was prior to this. I went and bought a road bike, started getting in the pool to swim a little bit. And yeah, it's 70.3 miles between the the swim bike and run. It was a good experience. Hope to do a full Ironman one day, but like you said, with 4 kids, I need to kind of find some time to train. I want to feel good about it when I go into it.
Yeah, fair enough. And you're not all outdoor sports and a family man, although that probably comes first. You do some other things around finance and accounting early on in your career. So I'm going to go ahead and guess that you know your numbers. What got you interested to move from finance and accounting into compensation, which is such a specialized area of a business?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I started my career, I think probably like a lot of people, not really knowing what I wanted long-term or having a perfect idea of that. So I started with a company that just put me into this great program to develop finance and accounting individuals, and I was doing project accounting work, a lot of finance type work like that. Did that for about 4.5 years, and as we came into the Great Recession and started to, I think some companies were coming out of it, but because of the nature of the construction industry and engineering, we were still dealing with it, and I had a chance to really think about my career. And for me, it was like I looked ahead and thought, if things go just as well as they possibly can over the next 10 years, where do I see myself? Is that where I want to be? And, I felt like the answer was no. And I didn't know, I just didn't have a passion for the accounting side of things and just crunching numbers all day. But what I had done at that company is early on, I asked for the opportunity to help out recruiting for this program and going and recruiting college students into it. And so I did that the whole kind of 4.5 years that I was there. And so I started to think, what about a career in HR? Obviously talent acquisition side doesn't really link to anything with numbers, But I knew I was probably going to do an MBA eventually, and I actually stopped work and did a full-time MBA, and totally switched my focus from finance over to HR. Had the opportunity to meet a lot of great people at a lot of great companies. Took a role at HP in, as you mentioned, this management associate program, which allowed me to experience not just talent acquisition, which I thought would be kind of my true passion, which is what drew me to the world of HR. But I also did a comp role and I did a business partner role. And coming out of that, I felt like my skill set was well aligned to the compensation world, having a background in finance. And it's something that I enjoyed. I mean, tying the people to the numbers, thinking about how to motivate and energize people around compensation and total rewards programs was something I enjoyed. So have, as you mentioned, been in that path since, and have really enjoyed it.
You said something really important there. You said that you took this risk to take on different roles and get into a rotational program. Most people wouldn't do that. They'd stay in finance and accounting and sort of put their head down. What gave you the confidence to be able to move within the organization and then ultimately find what you were really looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest risk, if I look at it for myself, was, like you said, stepping away from your day-to-day and saying, I'd spent 4.5, 5 years in finance and accounting roles, and I saw a career path there, but it just didn't excite me. And so for me, I felt like I've got a long career ahead of me. Is this really where I want to be? And that, I don't know that it gave me the full confidence, but I also felt like, just knowing myself, I felt like if I'm doing something I'm passionate about, and if I'm following sort of something that is more interesting to me, I think I'll be better at it. And I think ultimately it's going to lead to better outcomes. And so there were lots of people, frankly, I mean, we were coming out of the Great Recession. This was like 2010. So like I said, a little bit past, but a lot of people said, why would you quit a good job? Why would, you survive these layoffs and different things. Why would you quit? And so there was a risk there, but I just, certainly did my research, did my due diligence on what I thought the opportunities might be, and then took it. And then same thing with HP. It was a structured rotational program, which was great. But really trying to find that spot where I best fit was, honestly, when I first took a role in comp, I didn't think, hey, this is maybe my forever path. Just something I wanted more experience in, and I have been open to other opportunities as they've come along. It just has been the compensation space has provided me opportunities and been a really good fit for my skill set. So it's been where I've been spending my career.
So what helped you move through the organization and actually get there? Because you mentioned it didn't sort of cover your whole amount of fear. You weren't able to sort of absorb all of it. There's some sense of apprehension. What helped you get through that apprehension, and what helped you sort of move through the organization?
I think saying yes is huge. Somebody told me that early on in my career, like, look for opportunities to say yes and not no. When you say no to an opportunity, you're closing a door. And certainly I sort of did close a door on one, like a finance and accounting career, but I felt like there was a better path in this open door. But the more doors you can leave open, I never want to burn a bridge. And if somebody says, hey, would you mind spearheading this project or taking on this work? I've always tried to say, yes, I will try it, and I'll do my best. One other thing so when I was early in the comp world here at HP, I was managing compensation for different groups. I managed it for our global functions. I managed it for one of our business lines. And one of our business comp managers was taking on a new role, and it was going to leave a vacancy covering one of our big businesses. And so he asked if, hey, can I transition this over to you, and can you manage it in the short term? But I don't know how long that's going to be. And so once again, I said yes. And then I remember talking with him, and I was like, so how would you approach this? Would you just sort of keep the ship afloat? Because, this might be 3 months, it might be 6 months, it might be a year. Or would you set up meetings with the business leaders, start to understand their concerns around comp, dig in, kind of like what I do with my other groups? And he said, it really depends on what you want to get out of it. Like, if you look at everything as, I'm just going to keep the ship afloat, I'm only doing the short term, you're not going to come off as as somebody that's committed to it. And so I took that to heart too, and I tried to do the same thing with that business and meet with the leaders, understand their comp concerns, be proactive with the solutions that I was bringing to them, instead of just being there to answer questions and kind of keeping the ship afloat. And so I think that mentality is huge. Don't Don't go into something with a short term, I'm just going to do this and get through it and keep the ship afloat. I want to do the best I can in everything I do.
Yeah, so I think what I heard was say yes and then take a long-term strategic approach to whatever the project or task at hand is. Don't be short-sighted.
Yeah, exactly. I think people recognize that commitment, right? And you're not doing yourself any favors if you just, like I said, keep the ship afloat.
So I can't go any further in this discussion without asking the million-dollar question that everybody wants to know. And it's on the tip of my tongue. I know everybody listening is saying, just ask him the question. And the question is very simple. How do we all make more money in large organizations, Trapper? You have the keys to a very large organization compensation structure. How do we make more money?
Oh, the million-dollar question indeed. And I wish I had an easy answer for you to that question. I do feel like at HP, and I think most big companies, we've got very developed pay programs, but we do want to be, certainly at HP, a pay-for-performance organization. So we obviously tie a portion of somebody's pay to their salary, and then we tie a portion to variable programs like bonuses and like equity programs. And so I think what some would say is the scapegoat answer is if you perform better, you'll make more money, right? Like that's what internally within a company we would love to say is 100% of the time the answer, that the best performers do the best. But, you and I both know, and everybody listening probably knows, there's a 1,000 nuances to that. It's oftentimes if you're doing the work that you love and that you're good at, you're going to be perform better, you're going to lead to more money. So I think there's a lot there. Certainly not a quick or easy answer.
Well, I think that's a good start, right? We've got to figure out what we like and how we can perform at a high level. And I love pay for performance organizations because it incents the right behaviors and it aligns vision and goals of the individual with the goals of the organization. And so to me, that's the most important first step, is aligning those components. So what do you say to somebody who's feeling stuck and believes that they should be making $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 more than they're making today, and we could exchange that into euros or yen or Canadian dollars for our friends around the country, around the world. But what do you say to that person that's feeling stuck and just wants to take that next big jump?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a couple ways to look at this. One is the internal view. If you love your company and you're happy in the situation you're in, you've got good growth opportunities. My advice to that person is be open with your manager. One of the things that we do as we've tried to do manager training sessions and as we've done employee training sessions is show people what are the timelines that we typically look at compensation. So most companies have an annual sort of focal review process, and that's where you look at performance. You get in some companies a performance rating. You get oftentimes your bonus tied to that performance. So and you get a salary adjustment, and at HP it's a merit adjustment typically, but it's based in market. So that's the biggest opportunity when you're going to get your salary or your compensation touched. And then at HP we've got these checkpoints that happen just a couple times throughout the year, and it touches a much smaller percentage of the population. But we tell employees, here's the timeline. So if you go to your manager a week after this comp checkpoint and say, I need to make more money, first of all, it's not a great approach. But second of all, the timeline just passed. Right. I would say, once again, if you're internal, you like things about the company, you like your opportunities, have that conversation with your manager. I think, or based on research I've done, I think my market rate should be closer to this. What can I do? How can I prove to you that I'm worth this? And what's the timeline that I could reasonably expect that? And I think, some managers are going to be uncomfortable with that. They're going to say, well, HR won't let me, or whatever the case may be. But the bottom line is that at least at HP, and I think a lot of companies, managers have a lot of ability to influence that funding pool that they get, or start, sharing with leadership, this is a key employee. These are the things that I would like to do. And it isn't a short term, I'm going to do this for you in a week, but it could be, let's talk about this, and next year, let's see if we can get you a larger increase, things like that. So that's internally. externally, so that the reality of the market and the world that we live in is, I would be the first person to say to people that I talk to friends, to people that ask me the question about, should I look externally? I mean, if you don't if you're not in a situation at your company that you're happy with, if there's more than just the compensation factor, absolutely. I think there's a lot of research that shows the premium, the leaving premium, is typically higher than those that stay. And that's not an ideal situation. Believe me, we look at that internally too and go, how can we make it a more lucrative thing to stay? But really, we then focus more on what's the culture? How do we get people to stay? You have to have a base level of good compensation, or else people just aren't going to be happy. Once you've hit that, it's other factors. But so people that are not happy with their situation, want more money, start looking around. And if you're good and you've got a good resume, they're even as things kind of slow down, I think there's always going to be opportunities for people like that.
Yeah, there's always opportunities for great people. And I love the way you said it. You've got an internal view, you've got an external view, and you've got to look at compensation as a part of a whole. It is not the whole. And how many times have we heard people leave the organization, jump across the street for $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 more, which sounds fantastic. But then regret that decision, only to be on to their next company a year or two later, or be looking to return to their original company, where the culture was a better fit, the management, the leadership was just a better fit for them personally.
Yeah, well, we see this with the Great Resignation, and now the research is coming out about how many people regret that decision. I think it's like, well over 20% of people, actually I think it was 20% don't regret it. Like there's a high percentage, I'd have to look up the numbers, that say, yeah, I'm not sure I made the right decision, right? So, and I've seen it, since graduating my MBA program, a lot of my colleagues, many of them, over the course of the last 10 years are on to third, fourth, fifth companies. And sometimes that can work. But if you're in a situation where you have good growth opportunities, you like your management, you like the culture, staying at one company and having that stability is not a bad thing at all.
Not a bad thing at all. But where do you go and what do you do if you feel like you can't have that conversation with your manager? Or maybe said differently, your manager doesn't really understand this component, this compensation structure. Maybe they don't articulate the timelines well. What do you do with that manager piece?
That's a really tough question, because I think, once again, going back to good manager, if you've got a good manager, I think you're going to be very happy. And if you, first of all, you don't feel like you can approach your manager about this, I think that's a red flag to me. If you don't, because everybody knows, why do we come to work? Sure, we want to contribute and give back, but at the end of the day, we all need to make money too. So it should not be a taboo subject to bring it up to your manager of, how can I do this? Your second point is certainly well taken, because I think a lot of times managers just don't have the context or the full understanding. And we know, like I've heard within our organization, deep in the organization, we'll hear things like, well, I can't hire above midpoint, or I can't do this. And it's like, wait, who told you that? We have a range. Within that range, you're free to hire within your business affordability. But these are legacy mindsets that have kind of come up as maybe there was times that were lean and people were reducing and making hires lower in the range. So I think there are a lot of managers that maybe don't understand it as well. My advice to somebody dealing with that is still have the initial conversation with your manager, and then poke around the organization. I mean, it's hard to say at a company, over 50,000 employees. It's not always a direct line to someone in HR or someone in compensation that's going to be able to help you with that. But I will say we've got a very open door policy, and I've had employees ping me on Zoom that I do not know at all and ask me a question, and I just try to be patient. And we've got a lot of training resources as well on our internal intranet sites. And so I typically try to direct people to those. But it's tough to say. Not all companies have that level of FAQs and education for the employees to understand it. So I would definitely say have the conversation with your manager either way. And then if they don't quite understand it, keep digging.
Yeah. And there's a nuance a very important nuance that Trapper mentioned that I hope you all picked up on. If you didn't, I'm going to sort of draw it out a little bit for you. He used the word midpoint, and he said, if you understand where the midpoint is, or you're hiring at the midpoint. So what you need to know about every corporation is that there is a range of salary for a particular job title and job position. There's job codes, but without going too far, there's a low, there's a high, and there's a midpoint. And there is some legacy thinking that you can only hire external candidates at a midpoint, right? And during compensation reviews, or below, right? Yeah. At the high being the midpoint. And during compensation reviews, the word midpoint comes up a lot behind closed doors. And so help us understand how you ask that question within an organization without appearing to come off the wrong way or with the wrong intention.
Yeah, as an employee.
And you're trying to figure out, where's the midpoint, where's my salary, how do I do this elegantly without, sounding like a jerk?
Yeah, absolutely. So we created this Comp 101 training for managers, and then we also kind of shared it with employees. And one of my favorite diagrams within that we've kind of built out to illustrate this point is a salary structure, and it's just like minimum to maximum, like you said, with the midpoint. We actually have ours separated in different segments, and so we've got 5 segments there. And what we tell employees is not every employee should be at midpoint, right? That's what we want, is a bell curve that kind of, you've got employees paid above, you've got employees paid below, but the majority are in that strong range. We say segment 1 is people who are coming up to speed in the role. Maybe they're new in the role. They're not at full operating capacity. Segment 2 is as you're starting to get more confident and comfortable and contributing at a higher level within the role. Segment 3, which is encompassing that midpoint, is for people who are fully up to speed and competent in the role. And segments 4 and 5, that above midpoint sort of range, is employees that are above expectations in that role, performing at a high level, and perhaps ready for a promotional opportunity when that comes along. Now, I would love to say that that's the exact way everybody is slotted within the organization, but it's tough. You've got, depending on where somebody was hired, maybe they came in higher or lower, and that doesn't actually necessarily reflect it. But as an employee, sort of understanding that, and I think most companies employees aren't going to have access to their range and say, here's where I'm at. But I've told employees as well, have a conversation with your manager and ask them, hey, I'm just curious, how do you see my performance, and how am I paid relative to my performance on my pay structure? I know I'm asking a lot of managers there, but we want managers, certainly within HP, if they get questions like that, that's great, because those are the questions we want to help them answer and have those really good conversations with their employees. I don't think, once again, that it comes off as, unless you're coming to your manager saying, I need to make, 20% more, and I heard that all these people are making more and I need to make more. That's not a productive conversation. It's a productive conversation if you lead with performance. Hey, these are the things I've seen that I've done. Can you help me understand what my opportunities are for growth? Can you help me understand where I'm paid relative to my range and what my opportunities might be over the next X time period?
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of a real adult conversation, which is I have this performance laid out. I've done the things you've asked me to do. I've gone above and beyond, and I want to do this thoughtfully within the right amount of time, within the structure of the organization. Can you help me get to this point? Yeah. And here's where I'd like to go. By the way, here's where I'd like to go in my career, right? Because this is just a step on a path, and I would love to be at the company for a long period of time, and not be looking externally, right? You use some of that language as you just laid out, and your manager is going to say, my goodness, any good manager, by the way, would say, let me do what I can to figure this out with you collectively. We'll work together and provide some level of transparency and support along the way.
Yeah. The thing I loved about what you said is that as an employee, you're indicating my intention is to grow a career here. Not just, I got an offer for 10% more outside, pay me more. It's really, look, I do want to spend my career here. I like X, Y, and Z about it. This would help me feel even better. And how can we get to that point? So Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's really important, and we all have to make those personal decisions on the city we live in, and our transportation choices, and where our home or apartment is, and all of those things take money to pay for. So it's critically important. But I've always thought that the most important thing about compensation is the way that you approach the conversation. It's not the what.
Yeah.
It's the way and the style in which you approach your manager.
Agreed. Yeah, 100%. And it's funny because, I've got 4 kids, and one of the things about kids, sometimes they'll ask you, hey, Dad, how much money do you make? And what value, if I throw out a number, why are they asking that question? It's better for me to understand, why do you ask that? And I think as a manager, it's the same thing. As an employee, if you're coming with that conversation, or the employee's asking manager, where am I paid relative to my midpoint? You may not say, why do you ask that? But you may say, yeah, I can certainly look into that for you, but help me understand, where you're at, how you're feeling. Do you feel like, you're looking for something different? Are you concerned about your compensation? I think having productive conversations around compensation is better than just providing one-word answers. And certainly doing this over email, and it's just like, no, you need a conversation. These are important topics, and they can be sensitive topics. And so understanding the nuances through a conversation face-to-face over Zoom are I think best practices.
Yeah,
for sure.
That's a great one. Don't do this in the written word. Please don't do this in the written word. There is no way for you to explain it that way. For those of you that are introverts or feel like this is too big of a conversation, trust me, I've been there. Many people have been there. Write it down. It's okay to write it down. You just don't hit send. Put it in a document, take your notes, have your bullet points, and then get on Zoom. If you can do it in person, that's even better. But it's okay to have a game plan. It's not okay to take that game plan and fire it off in 6 different paragraphs in an email, because trust me, it's going to get shut down pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the right way to frame it is tell your manager you want to have a conversation about your opportunities in your career. And as part of that, understanding better your compensation. Once again, I think any good manager is going to see that as a sign of, okay, this person, they're ambitious, they're interested in compensation, which I can understand, and they want to have the conversation. I guarantee you managers would appreciate that over, I got an offer from a company, across the street for X% more, and I'm going to leave, or can you counter it? You know what I mean? It's like that is a late conversation, and I think managers definitely prefer to have the conversation early and know how you're feeling.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. And it sort of leads us down this path of the word transparency and pay transparency and understanding different layers within an organization. Where do you stand on transparency of pay for employees?
Yeah, that's a tough one as well. So as I think about pay transparency, I think you've got 3 levels of pay transparency. You've got the total black box, which I think about companies, startup companies that just don't have pay structures built yet. They're kind of going, we need to hire a head of product, or we need to hire this, and we don't know what to pay, but I know this person and we'll have to pay him 10% more. Whatever it is, that's the black box. They don't even have a structure. They don't know where they should be paying you. They're not doing good benchmarking. Or it's companies that maybe do have all of that, but they still don't want to share anything. They're just very quiet about it. Okay, I think that's the lowest level. Level 2 is where I think you start to get a lot of big companies in this mode where you've got good structures developed. You've got a midpoint, you've got a progression through that range that you share with managers. You've got good processes for addressing pay, like an annual review cycle. And that's a good point to be in. Some, like maybe a 2 point, some of these companies don't necessarily share ranges with managers, or they share the range of the employees that work for them. Maybe a 2.5 would be they share, all managers can access all pay ranges, right? And that's kind of where HP's in that mode of, we're pretty transparent with managers. Here's the ranges. Here's how we do our comp, because we want to enable them to have those conversations with their employees and be able to manage comp to manage performance, performance-based pay. I would say level 3 is where you've got complete transparency. So employees can well, let's say this. Level 3 might be all employees can access all pay ranges. That way they can look and see, here's where I'm at today in my range. Here's where I might be if I get that promotion, and here's the range at that point, and they understand all of that. And then maybe the next level on top of that is everybody can see everybody's pay. I don't say the level 3 and 3.5 is a good thing necessarily, because I think there's downsides that come with that. Government entities are a great example of, most government entities, maybe all in the US, you can go out and look what the chief of police in your town makes pretty easily. You can see if their pay for the last X number of years. And we don't typically look at government entities as being the pinnacle of pay for performance. It's typically a very tenure-based, and you grow through it. So once again, I think those are the levels of pay transparency. I think there's arguments for moving into that third one where employees all have access to at least the ranges, but a lot of companies are more in that level 2 of we have ranges. We try to empower managers either by sharing all ranges or communicating with them. And I think that's where we see most companies, or most big companies these days.
So what's the risk of sharing all company ranges with the general employee population of maybe individual contributors that don't have direct reports? Is the issue that, my goodness, I can see my boss's title and I know that my boss is a senior director and her range is between X and Y and the midpoint is Z, and now I know what my boss makes? Is that the issue?
Yeah. Well, I think the issue with sharing ranges is twofold. It might be that, there might be some of that. Well, they can see that. That could also be seen as a motivator, like, ooh, if I can get to that level, look at this range and look what possibilities open up to me financially. So I think you could say that's a good thing. I think the challenge and one of the risks, and I think I feel some of this, and I've talked to many peers that feel this as well, is oftentimes your pay structures are going to represent market, and you will use market based on, some companies benchmark to a higher percentage of market. Other companies are going to benchmark to a lower percent or right in the middle. And depending on what peer group you use, you might use a group that's a lower paid group. So market's although it sounds like a really scientific, it's an easy number to understand, there's a lot that goes into that. But you build your structures on market, and we do that. And when we see the market move, we move our structures. But business affordability comes into play. And so you've got really good years, and you might have a really strong bonus. You might even have really good salary adjustments. But over time, your salaries, and like I said, that midpoint curve, right, that curve of salaries right around the midpoint, may not be the way that all companies are. And the worry is you've got an employee that is actually a high-performing employee, and they're paid below that midpoint. And it's not because you don't want to pay more. It's just that you've been limited in budgets. You've had other priorities you needed to take care of. And so all of a sudden there's a dissatisfaction that comes with that. Well, I'll share with you an example. The Sacramento Bee had posted all salaries. There's a website posts all salaries of California state employees. And they did this study at UC Berkeley back in 2011. And they gave people the link to this. Not that they didn't have access before, but they gave people the link. This actually shared individual salaries, right? And they found that people that accessed it increased a lot when they shared that link with them. And about 80% of people that were accessing it were, looking at their peers and trying to figure out, obviously, where they fared relative to peers. You could say the same thing for ranges. Where do I fare relative to my midpoint? The outcomes of it, and when they did a survey after on people that had accessed the data, and what they found is the people who were paid below kind of the average of their peers were obviously much more dissatisfied. So increased levels of job dissatisfaction and increased likelihood or intent to leave. But you think, well, probably balanced out because, you've got people that are paid really well and they're probably even more happy because they know how well they're paid. That's not the way it played out, though. The people that were paid above that median or above their peers actually showed very similar levels of job satisfaction and no change in intent or likelihood to leave. So that, I think, is the fear, and I think it's founded in some ways because you're either going to have people upset because they're paid below midpoint, or neutral because they're paid well, and they think, oh, I probably deserve that then. So I think those are some of the challenges. Maybe not being able to match internal salaries to market because historical or affordability issues, and secondly, the fact that what good does it bring you? You're going to have unhappy employees and neutral employees. So I think those are
it's a bit of a mixed bag when we look at it in terms of human behavior and what's going to happen as a result of too much transparency in particular markets. And it makes me think of what's happened in the last couple of years around the globe. And this question is for all of my friends that do not live in big cities and do not live in high income earning states. New York, California, you can think of Chicago and, some parts of Illinois, the big cities, Dallas and Houston, Miami, Atlanta, right? Mm-hmm. For the folks that are not in those cities, I had a friend of mine in HR. We were talking about this the other day. They had a great teammate in Minnesota who was working from home anyway because of the last couple of years and was earning a Minnesota wage at market. Mm-hmm. And a California company out of the Bay Area came and said, hey, it's a new world. We don't mind if you work from home in Minnesota. You don't have to move to California. But, oh, by the way, there's a 15% pay discrepancy between California and Minnesota. And so let's just start there. You get a 15% increase. And, oh, by the way, you're actually below your midpoint for your job. And we'd love to have you join the company. Yeah. So we're going to add another 10% to get you just above midpoint. And you don't have to move a muscle. You can stay right at that home office that you love so much, but we'll just pay you 25% more to come work for a big market company. How do you defend against that?
That is a huge topic of conversation amongst comp nerds like myself recently, I'll tell you that. This geographic differential, since the pandemic, the conversation has continued to swirl around, do you just go away with it? I mean, because a talent in the middle of a cornfield in Iowa could be just as good, just as talented as a software engineer in, Silicon Valley, as an example. So we've seen a lot of different things happen. Airbnb announced probably 4 months ago that they had geographic pay differentials like most companies do or have. And they said, you know what, we're doing away with those. You can work from anywhere, and we're going to bring everybody up to the highest in the U.S., which was California's. And they brought everybody up to that rate, which is kind of crazy. So getting back, how do you defend about it? Well, one thing I'll say is we are not seeing mass movement in the market to do similar approaches and getting away from geographic pay differentials. We still see most companies doing that, and we've stuck with that ourselves. And then secondly, I think it comes back to helping employees understand why compensation is what it is, what the ranges are, and then once employees feel like they're paid at least fairly, it's a lot more about everything else around your experience at a company than just strictly the dollars and cents. And I think we see that. Not everybody is just jumping for the next highest offer. I mean, that would be kind of crazy, although it felt like that a little bit with the Great Recession over the last year. But definitely a tough question, and something I think companies are working through right now. Do we move to no geographic differentials? Do we simplify it? Or do we do what some other companies have done? Google got a lot of headlines for this of saying, here's your calculator, move where you want, but you'll see your associated pay reduction that comes with that, or increase depending on where you move.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting topic. And for those that are thinking about leaving big cities, does that impact your comp in some way if you move from Dallas to a smaller market? If you move from Chicago somewhere that is maybe a little bit more affordable, do you end up losing compensation as a result? There are some companies, there's a third view here. There are some companies that say, look, if you're moving from a bigger market to a smaller, we won't give you a reduction in comp, but you're welcome to move. And take your family and take the lift in lifestyle, but we're not going to reduce your comp. So I think there's maybe 3 or 4 different approaches that people are looking at. But this is a hot topic over the next couple of years because it's not going to slow down. And we've got to get this figured out so that people stay and they're retained at organizations. And there's not a brain drain from really good companies like HP and others.
Yep, absolutely.
So we've covered most of it today, all compensation. How do we leave people with the confidence that they can go into a conversation, engage with their manager, understand transparency metrics and annual reviews and ratings? All of that comes together, right? And we've got to say yes to opportunities in organizations. I heard that loud and clear today. And we've got to enable managers to have the tools. These are things that I heard you say today. But if I was working at HP today, Trapper, and I gave you a call and I said, look, I'm really struggling. I've got some things in my life and I could really use a little bit of a pay raise. What would be the first thing you'd say, Tom, take this one step and then come back to me? What would be that one thing you'd ask me to do?
The one step I would say is go talk to your manager first, right? So especially, and we've talked about this quite a bit today, but especially at a company like HP or really any company that's probably got structures and a compensation function, I'm not doling out raises, to people left and right. We're building structures, we're training, we're ensuring that we're market competitive, and we're sort of driving that approach. In fact, one of the core pillars of our comp philosophy is manager empowerment. So we do want managers to be that front line. We want them, and we've acquired companies where managers go, you're expecting me to have conversations around, you're not giving me the formula on you're giving this employee 4.2% and this. No, we're going to give you, this is market for this employee this year, and this is your budget within affordability, and it's X percent. You can go up or down from that, and then you get to explain to your employee why they got 5%, 3%, why they got a bonus that was 10% above target or 10% below target, So that's one thing that I know companies do it more formulaically, and I know we won't go into this today, but we don't have performance ratings at HP, and there's a lot of companies that went away with those in the last decade. We're one of them. It limits your ability to formulaically decide how valuable an employee is or how their performance has been. So we put that on managers and we give them the tools to have the right conversations and to pay their people based on their performance. So if you came to me, I would say, look, talk to your manager. Here's some resources you can research first. And if it was a friend not within HP or someone else that was talking to me, I would say there are resources. We live in the digital age. Check out Glassdoor, check out Blind, look at some of what you're seeing out there, take it with a grain of salt, because you're only seeing one piece of the picture. You might say, this person has 4 years of experience and they're making 20% more than me. Well, what are the other factors? Is it the same degree type? Is it the same location? Is it, so there's a lot that goes into it, but I'm all about information. And I definitely think people should avail themselves as best they can with the information, both online and then ultimately going back to their manager.
So if you want to get a raise, my friends, do your research, have an open conversation with your manager, and then be patient in terms of making sure you're in the right spot, you've got the right career trajectory, you're in the right place, on the right team. All of those things are really critically important and equal, if not more important than just pure compensation at the end of the day. Trapper, thank you so much for being on the show today. Tons of insight, global head of compensation for HP, which is just a terrific role, and appreciate all of the good work that you do. If somebody wanted to find you and track you down and not ask you too many questions, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, LinkedIn's a great place. Once again, digital age, huge fan of LinkedIn. I try to be responsive as much as possible. So that's probably the easiest way.
Yeah, so you can find Trapper Yates at LinkedIn. We will put that in the show notes for you, so you don't have to look too far. You'll just be able to click on a link there and connect with Trapper as well. So Trapper, thank you so much for being on the show. Grateful for having you and your time and the brain and thoughtfulness that you brought to our conversation today. So very, very well received by the audience, I'm sure. Thank you for being here.
Well, I appreciate appreciate the invite to be here and for spending some time with
Okay,
me
my
today,
friend.
Tom.
And for all of you out there, thank you for joining the Talent Empowerment Podcast. I hope this conversation lifted you up so you can lift up your teams and your organizations and perhaps your own income. Let's get back to people and culture together.